What is going on, everyone? Hope you guys had a fantastic weekend. I had a great weekend myself. Spent it with my girlfriend doing stuff around the house. On one day it was raining, and we also went down to the beach one day and had a barbecue. So absolutely amazing time. Hope all of you are living life to the fullest as well. But today we are going to be getting into some testing with the Ryzen 1400 paired up with the GTX 1080. Now, I know you might be thinking, Joker, that doesn't really make any sense. Who's going to go out and buy a card that costs over $500 and pair it with, a sub $200 CPU? Probably not too many people. But that is the reason I wanted to do this video, to see just how crazy it actually is. Is it really that bad to pair a Ryzen 1400, which you can get right now on Amazon for $159, with the GTX 1080, which you can actually usually find those now, even though the whole cryptocurrency thing is going on. You can find those between $500 and $600 on Amazon, which is where they should be. There is some limited stock, but you could still find them, pretty much around the internet if you do some looking, without really having to overpay for the GTX 1080. But we're going to be getting into some testing here on the Ryzen 1400, as mentioned in a few titles at 1080p and 1440p. I opted not to test in 4K because you're really getting into the area of pixel throughput, which is just putting more stress on the GTX 1080 rather than the CPU. And we'll even be able to see that here with 1080 and 1440p testing. Now, as far as the setup is concerned, the 1400 and the GTX 1080 were both kept at their stock settings. The reason I did that is that I don't think most 1400 owners are probably going to overclock. Of course, the enthusiasts out there who are on a budget will opt to overclock their CPU, but for this testing, I just wanted to leave both of those, the CPU and the GPU, at stock settings. I did enable the XMP for our 16 gigabytes of Corsair Vengeance RAM, so that sat at 2933 megahertz, and with GPU boost kicking in on the 1080, it was anywhere from around 1800 to 1860 megahertz, depending on how that would all come into play. So obviously one of the big reasons you'd want to do this test is to see if the Ryzen 1400 is going to be a bottleneck for the GTX 1080, because you don't want to go out and spend over $500 on a graphics card usually and see a big limitation as far as how it's going to be utilized just because of your CPU. It's going to be kind of disheartening if you go out and spend that much money only to plug it into your system and see the card sitting at like 60% usage in some of the more demanding games you're trying to play because of limitations on the CPU side of things. So hopefully we can kind of see, how far the limitation goes and where we can eliminate that. So unlike 1080p in quite a few of these games, I was seeing a limitation, not in all of them, but some of the big ones were Battlefield 1. That game is known to be really, really CPU intensive. So even at 1080p and even at 1440p, I was not seeing full GPU utilization throughout the entire benchmark, which is indicative of seeing a CPU bottleneck there, very likely coming down to the speed of the Ryzen 1400, which is at 3.2 gigahertz. So there's probably some limitation there. You can overclock it to alleviate some of that restriction coming from the CPU side of things. But for our testing, like I said, we were running at stock settings. Another game of a good example where this would eliminate if you increase the resolution is Prey, where on 1080p I was seeing the GPU utilization coming down below 99% usage, but at 1440p it was getting pushed all the way. So the bottleneck there is pretty much completely eliminated by playing at a higher resolution. That's good news if you are planning to pick up a GTX 1080 for some reason, pairing it with a Ryzen 1400, you wouldn't see as much of a bottleneck at 1440p. And I don't know if that many people are going to go out and do that, but the one scenario I could see is maybe someone built a Ryzen 1400 system, paired it with a lower power GPU, going to upgrade at a later point, and maybe you came into some money. Maybe you got a nice tax return this year, and you got enough money to buy a GTX 1080, but you don't have enough money to invest it in the rest of your system. So that could be a decent upgrade path because of, you could always, improve on your Ryzen CPU later on in your B350 or X370 motherboard and pick up something like the 1700 or the Ryzen 1600, which would probably be a little bit better of a pairing with the GTX 1080. But like I said, at 1440p, you're not going to see as much of a limitation. Titles like The Division, I didn't see any limitation at all as far as the CPU is concerned. Rainbow Six Siege, was another one. I had no limitations there. The Witcher 3 definitely did have some hitching for me at 1080p, but that wasn't really there so much in 1440p. Even though I was getting good GPU utilization, I was seeing some hitching there in that particular title. So that might be coming down to the CPU or possibly driver optimization, but it seemed like the CPU was kind of struggling to process some of the next scenes that were coming up as I was going through the world in Witcher 3. But let's get fired into the benchmarks now, where we can see at 1080p, this is on the Ultra preset here, with our Ryzen 1400 and GTX 1080 at stock settings. In the yellow here, we've got our average FPS, and then in the black, the 1% lows. And you can see at 1080p, the GTX 1080 is having no issues whatsoever, as you would expect with this particular resolution. And even in the titles that I mentioned there, where we were seeing a little bit of a bottleneck and not getting full GPU utilization, you're still getting an excellent frame rate. You're not going to, I don't feel like you're going to be limited to the point where you're not going to, I mean, you're definitely going to get over 60 FPS. That's not an issue. You can see the majority of these titles here are actually getting over 100 FPS average, and only in a couple titles, The Division and Witcher 3, which are very demanding games, did we see the 1% lows come down below 60 FPS. So this is good news, even though, you know, like I said, in some games like Prey wasn't getting full utilization at 1080p. The Witcher, Battlefield 1, all of those titles were not getting full 100% GPU usage, still running extremely well, and it's not going to be to the point where you won't be able to enjoy playing these games by any means. Switching over to 1440p now, where that CPU bottleneck is eliminated in almost every game here, apart from on Battlefield 1, where that's still got an average of 84 FPS, 1% low of 61. And across the board here, we're still getting excellent performance out of the GTX 1080 paired with the Ryzen 1400. Once again, The Division and Witcher 3, they did have 1% lows down below 60, with The Division getting 42 and The Witcher 3 getting 45, but that's really just with how demanding those games are on the GPU. The Witcher 3 was getting full usage. I just happened to see some hitching in my testing. Not sure if that's going to show up in the video here for you guys, but I was noticing it when I was playing the game. So yeah, those are all the benchmarks I ran on the Ryzen 1400 with GTX 1080. I hope you guys found this video interesting. For anyone out there that might actually be thinking about pairing a $160 CPU with an over $500 graphics card, which isn't always super advisable, but as you can see here, it's really not that bad. I mean, you're not going to be limited to the point where you can't play these games in any way. But obviously, I would hope you're going to at least consider a CPU upgrade path at some point in the future with a 1700 or maybe second gen Ryzen, if that's still going to be supported on the previous generation motherboards. We don't really know how that's going to all work out yet, if these B350 and X370 boards will be supported for the next generation or two. We really don't know that yet, or even when Ryzen, the second generation of Ryzen, will be available, maybe sometime in 2018. We really don't know. But if I was going to get a GTX 1080, I would still want to get a little bit faster of a CPU, or at least overclock the Ryzen 1400. You should be able to get those up to around 3.8 to 4 gigahertz, and that would certainly alleviate some of the performance issues that we saw here in this video. But for stock settings even, you can still get a lot of performance out of the GTX 1080, even with a $160 CPU like Ryzen 1400. So I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here, guys. Please let me know your thoughts, as always, down in the comments below. I look forward to our discussions, as always. And if you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like on it down below and subscribing if you're not already. And if you have been here for a while, you can always, hit the notification bell so you find out whenever I upload new GPU benchmark videos like this one. And if you want to pick up a GTX 1080 or the Ryzen 1400 or any other parts I was using in this system here today, I will be sure to link to those over on Amazon in the description, which do support my channel. And I will catch you guys next time. Ta-ra.